So I remember that I was somehow above the surgery table, seeing my own body, surrounded by doctors, and I should have been scared. It looked like I died. But in that moment, floating above, I felt love and curiosity. I asked myself why I was there, but every doubt and question in my mind was like swept away by this intense, warm feeling of love, like I was where I was supposed to be.
Some people die, but they come back to share their stories of what lies ahead of all of us. This is Melissa's story.
It all started when I was pregnant with my first kid. I was so excited to become a mom, Bruce and I had been planning and dreaming about it for ages. We had the nursery all set up, pale yellow walls with little ducks on the border, a white crib that Bruce had spent an entire weekend assembling, with a lot of cursing I might add, and this adorable mobile with stars and moons. I'd spend hours in there, just imagining what it would be like when our baby finally arrived. But then things went sideways. I went into labor early, which was scary enough. I remember feeling this sense of panic, like no, it's too soon. We rushed to the hospital, and I was trying to stay calm, but inside I was terrified. What if something was wrong with the baby? What if I couldn't do this? Then everything just went crazy. My blood pressure shot up, my liver started failing, and I was having seizures. It was a mess. I remember the room was so bright, and there were so many people rushing around. The machines were beeping like crazy, and everyone looked so serious. I could hear snippets of conversation. BP's rising, we need to stabilize her, but it all sounded far away, like I was underwater or something. I remember the midwife trying to put in a catheter. Her hands were shaking a little, and she kept apologizing. "I'm sorry, honey, I know this isn't comfortable." And then the doctor, this tall woman with greying hair and kind eyes, she just burst in and started shouting orders. Her voice was so firm, so urgent. That's when I knew things were really bad. And then the weirdest thing happened. Suddenly, I wasn't in my body anymore. I know it sounds nuts, but I swear I was floating up in the corner of the room, watching everything happen below me. I could see myself on the bed, pale and still. I could see the doctors rushing around, prepping for surgery. So one of the nurses was squeezing my hand and talking to me, telling me to hang on. But from where I was, it all seemed so distant, like I was watching a movie or something. But here's the really strange part. I didn't feel scared or sad or anything. You'd think see yourself like that would be terrifying, right? But it wasn't. It was like I was just an observer with no real connection to what was happening. I didn't feel any pain, any fear, just this sense of curiosity, and strangely enough, love. A lot of love. A feeling that I am safe where I am supposed to be. For 3 days they kept me in a coma while they tried to stabilize me. My son was born during that time way too early, and he was fighting for his life in the neonatal intensive care unit. When I finally woke up, it was like surfacing from deep water. Everything was hazy and confusing. The lights were too bright, sounds were too loud. I remember trying to speak, but my throat was so dry from the breathing tube that I could barely make a sound. Bruce was there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he had this scruffy beard that he'd grown while camping out at the hospital. When he saw I was awake, he just broke down crying. That's when it really hit me how close I'd come to dying. But even as I was trying to process everything that had happened, I couldn't shake the memory of that out-of-body experience. It was like this vivid dream that stayed with you long after you woke up. I kept replaying it in my mind, trying to make sense of it. I grew up going to a small Protestant church, It was one of those tiny white buildings with a steeple, the kind you see in old movies about a small town. My grandpa and uncle were the preachers, and my dad was a deacon. Every Sunday we'd pile into our old station wagon, all dressed up in our Sunday best, and head to church. I knew all the hymns by heart, could recite Bible verses on command. I'd always been taught about God and heaven and all that. The idea was pretty straightforward. Be good, follow the rules, and you'll go to heaven when you die. Simple, right? But what I felt in that hospital room, it didn't match up with anything I'd been taught. There was no feeling of being judged or anything like that. No pearly gates, no angels with harps. Just this weird, peaceful feeling of being disconnected from everything, but incredibly loved at the same time. An immense feeling of love. I told Bruce about it, but I didn't really know how to explain it to anyone else. How do you put something like that into words, you know? I mean, I've always considered myself pretty practical. I worked in maternal and child health at a medical school. I believe in science and data and all that. But this was something else entirely. It didn't fit into any of the neat little boxes I'd used to organize my understanding of the world. After I got out of the hospital, I tried to push it all to the back of my mind. I had a premature baby to take care of, and I was still recovering myself. My days were a blur of diaper changes, feeding schedules, and doctor's appointments. I was exhausted all the time, barely sleeping, always worried about my son's health. But that memory of floating above my body, it just wouldn't go away. In those quiet moments, when the baby was finally asleep and the house was still, it would come flooding back. I kept wondering what it meant. Was it just my brain going haywire from lack of oxygen? Some kind of weird hallucination caused by the medication they'd given me? Or was it something more? I didn't have any answers, and honestly, I was too busy with my new baby to think about it too much. But it was always there, in the back of my mind, like a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. Life went on, you know. My son got stronger, I went back to work, and things started to feel normal again. Well, as normal as life can be with a new baby. I thought maybe that weird experience was just a one-time thing, something I'd eventually forget about. But then, just when I thought life was getting back to normal, it happened again. And this time it was even crazier. It was Valentine's Day, and Bruce and I were heading out to meet some friends for dinner. But it was our first real night out since the baby was born, and I was so excited. I remember getting all dressed up, putting on makeup for the first time in months. I felt like a real person again, not just a mum. It was freezing cold that night. I was wearing this big, heavy coat that used to belong to my mum. It was one of those classic Chesterfield coats, you know, wool, with a velvet collar. I always felt a bit like Audrey Hepburn when I wore it. We were running late, as usual. Bruce was fiddling with the radio, trying to find a good station, and I was just relieved to see the green light as we approached this busy intersection. Then, out of nowhere, this guy in an SUV runs the red light and smashes right into us. I don't remember the actual crash. 1 minute we're driving, laughing about something silly, and the next thing I remember is that same weird feeling of not being in my body. But this time it was different, so different. I wasn't just floating above the scene. It was like I had dissolved, I guess, like I was part of everything all at once. There was this bright yellow light all around me, and I felt so peaceful and happy. It's hard to explain, but it was like I was home, like I'd finally found where I belonged. Imagine the warmest, safest, most loving place you've ever been. Now multiply that feeling by 1,000,000. That's what it felt like. It was like being wrapped in pure love. I felt connected to everything, the trees, the stars, the earth, every person who had ever lived or would ever live. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about Bruce or my son or the accident. None of that seemed to matter. I was just there, part of everything. And I felt God. But not the God I'd learned about in church. This wasn't some old man in the sky judging everyone. This was everything. It was like God was in everything, and all I felt was love. Pure love, no strings attached. You know how they say your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die? It wasn't like that at all. There was no replay of my greatest hits or biggest regrets. There was just this overwhelming sense of belonging, of being exactly where I was supposed to be. I didn't want to leave. I mean, why would I? I felt so safe, so at peace. It was like I'd found the answer to every question I'd ever had, even though I couldn't put it into words. But then I heard Bruce calling my name.
Melissa, 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 wake up, wake up, wake up.
At first, it was like he was really far away, like someone calling from the other end of a long tunnel. But he kept calling, and his voice got louder and louder, pulling me back. I remember feeling this sense of reluctance, like a kid being called in from playing outside on a perfect summer day. I didn't want it to end. But Bruce's voice was so insistent, so full of fear and love, but I couldn't ignore it. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the car. Everything looked weird and dreamlike. There were these tiny sparkly things floating in the air, maybe from the airbag, I don't know. It looked almost beautiful, like glitter in the sunlight. I could see someone running past the car, waving their arms. Turned out it was the guy who hit us. He didn't even have a license. Can you believe that? I looked over at Bruce, and he was covered in blood. His glasses were smashed, and he had this big cut on his forehead. He was talking to me, but I couldn't understand what he was saying at first. It was like my brain couldn't process words yet. My body felt all numb and strange, like it wasn't quite mine yet, like I was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. Then this man appeared at my window. I remember him so clearly. He was in his 40s, balding, with curly hair. He looked like an ordinary office worker, you know? The kind of guy you'd pass in the grocery store without a second glance. But in that moment, he seemed different, special somehow. He had this calm, reassuring presence about him. He told me he was going to undo my seatbelt, but wouldn't move me unless the car caught fire. His voice was so steady, so soothing. He stayed with me, holding my hand until the ambulance came. I remember him telling me, "You're going to be okay. Just hold on." And somehow I believed him. So the weird thing is, Bruce doesn't remember this guy at all. We tried to find out who he was later, but no one else saw him either. Sometimes I wonder if he was real, or if he was an angel or something. I don't know. I've stopped trying to figure it out. Maybe some things are just meant to remain a mystery, you know? I was pretty banged up from the accident. My ribs were all bruised, and for months it hurt to breathe. Every breath felt like I was being stabbed with tiny knives. I had this huge bruise over my heart that took forever to heal. It was this ugly purple and green thing that spread across half my chest. But honestly, the physical pain wasn't the worst part. I was more shaken up by what I'd experienced when I was gone, I guess. I didn't talk about it for a long time. I mean, how do you even start that conversation? Hey, guess what? I dissolved into the universe and felt at one with God. Yeah, right. People would think I was crazy. So I kept it to myself, turning it over and over in my mind, like a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. But it really messed with my head, you know. Everything I'd been taught about God and death and all that, it just didn't fit with what I'd experienced. There was no judgment, no pearly gates, none of that stuff. Just peace and love. It was like I'd been given a glimpse behind the curtain of the universe, and what I saw there didn't match up with anything I'd been told to expect. Over time, I started to rethink everything I believed. I read about other people who'd near-death experiences, and a lot of them described the same things I felt. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone, that I wasn't going crazy. There were doctors, lawyers, kids, people from all walks of life who had experienced something similar. It made me feel less alone, less like I was losing my mind. Oh, I started to see the world differently. Little things that used to bother me just didn't seem important anymore. I mean, who cares if someone cuts you off in traffic when you've touched the infinite, you know? I found myself being more patient, more understanding. It was like I could see the bigger picture now, and all the petty day-to-day stuff just faded into the background. Now I'm not afraid of dying anymore. I mean, I don't want to leave my family or anything. I want to see my son grow up, to grow old with Bruce. But I know that when my time comes, it'll be okay. I'll go back to that peaceful place, that feeling of being part of everything. It's actually kind of comforting in a weird way. I don't go to church much these days. My faith has changed a lot. I don't believe in a God who's keeping score of our good deeds and bad deeds anymore. I don't think there's some divine ledger where every little thing we do is being tallied up. I believe in a God that's in everything that is everything. A God that's all about love. Pure, unconditional love. It's funny, you know. I used to think I had it all figured out. Go to church, be a good person, and you're set. But life has a way of shaking things up. Those two brushes with death, They changed everything for me. They showed me that there's so much more to life and death than we can ever understand. And that's okay. I'm just grateful for the glimpse I got and for the peace it's given me. These experiences, they've made me appreciate life more. Every sunrise, every laugh with my son, every quiet moment with Bruce, it all feels like a gift now. I try to live each day with more kindness, more understanding. Because in the end, that's what it's all about. Love and connection. Everything else is just details. So yeah, that's my story. Pretty wild, huh? I don't expect everyone to believe it or understand it. Heck, I'm not sure I fully understand it myself. But I know what I experienced, and it's changed me forever. In a good way, I think. I just try to live each day with love now, because in the end, that's what it's all about. Sometimes I look at my son, or I catch Bruce's eye across the room, and I'm just overwhelmed with gratitude for this life, for this second chance, for the love I feel. And I think maybe that's the point of it all. Not some grand plan or divine judgment, but just love, pure and simple. So that's me now. Still the same person in a lot of ways. I still burn the toast and forget to put gas in the car, but different too. Changed and grateful. So grateful for every moment, every breath, every chance to love and be loved. Because now I know that's what really matters. That's what lasts.